Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Piotr Prus. It's last talk of the day, and we are here today to talk about Jetpack Glance. So I will be talking, you'll be listening, but we'll learn about Jetpack Glance. So the first question, how many of you built a widget for Android anytime? Okay, like half of you. That's great. And how many of you use the Jetpack Glance for it? 5 person roughly? Good. So we'll be talking about how the Jetpack Glance is communicating with the home screen and how it corresponds with the normal current or legacy, whatever you name it, system of Android widgets. And quickly about the agenda, we'll do the introduction to the widget, talk about widget providers, composing some widget UI, then we will talk about the state, some changes to the state, initial configuration, so how to configure the widget when we are placing that on the home screen, and at the end, how to launch the app from the widget and why we still need the XMLs. So let's go to the introduction. So do you know how many Android users have at least one widget active on the home screen? It's quite a big number. It's 84% of users. The widgets are with us from API 1, and they were called by Google a little application on the home screen. So it's pretty old technology, and to display the widget on the home screen, you're using RemoteViews. And now we have new kid in the party, it's Jetpack Glance. And how Jetpack Glance works is taking the Glance app widget library, you have the Glance app provider, then it's running on Compose runtime to produce RemoteViews and XML. Because on the home screen, we still need to use RemoteViews. It's from API 1, so this is how it is. So the Glance is some kind of wrapper on the RemoteViews that we are displaying on the home screen. Currently, Glance is in Alpha 5, and it's not going very fast, I would say. It started as Alpha 1 in December 21, and the current version was introduced in October 22. So it's going slowly, but sorry about this, but I wanted to say that in my opinion, it's okay to use it on production, and I will tell you why during that presentation. But to run the Glance widget, Glance library, you need to enable the Compose build features because it's using Compose runtime, and you need to enable the Compose options and Kotlin compiler extension. So let's talk about the widget providers. The current situation with widget provider is that you need to extend your class with app widget provider, and then you need to override 2 functions, on receive and on update. If you will building the widget using that providers, you know how painful it is to receive all those events and when to update the UI, when to receive things and what to do with them. And currently with Glance, you have just 3 lines of code. You're just extending Glance app widget receiver, and then you are just overwriting one val, which is your Glance app widget class. In Glance, we are using something like Compose, but it's not Compose. It's not Compose functions, but we are calling them glanceable functions, but they are using Compose runtime. And here I will tell you briefly how to create this simple UI. And this simple UI is represented by its state, which is called widget state. We have the data that will be displayed, and then loading if it's true or false. To create the widget class, we just need to extend the Glance app widget, and we have one function to override, which is content. And as you can see, this is composable function, and this will work as our root for composable, so we can put every piece of the UI inside of this composable. For now, I will pass the state into the constructor of the class, the same way as you are doing that for composable functions. We'll get into that later, how to improve that, but for now, let's keep it simple. So in the content, there is one very important thing, which is the root of our view. In my case, it's just a box. But take a look at here and in the background. You have this glance modifier, which is different than normal modifier. And you have the modifier called app widget background. So each glance widget needs to have this app widget background modifier to be visible on your screen, to actually work as a widget. And you can set the background. In my case, is the image that I'm taking from Drawable. You could also use the corner radius, since this is introduction in Android 12, the corner radius. But this is pretty much not usable currently because the minimum version is API 31. So going really briefly from this simple design, you're doing something like compose functions, like you have here column, 2 rows, so images, spacer, text, and that's it. And you can display the UI. But there is very important thing to note that all those components are coming from different package. And this package is androidx.glance. And the reason I'm pointing to that is that the column has the same name as the column from Compose. But if you will use this column from Glance in your activity, the app will crash. So my advice is to create separate module just for Glance, because then you will not mess up with libraries. And here's the list, quite simple, as you can see, and short. What are the available Glance components and Glance modifiers? So you have column, lazy, column, row, box, things like that. And then the height, width, size, padding, background, radius, visibility, and clickable. So not a lot, but enough to create simple widgets. So let's go down very shortly how I build this first row. So there is an image. As you can see, we are using here the glance modifier, not modifier. So we will not be mistaken with the composable modifier. Then we have a spacer. Then we have a text, simple things. We can style the text as usual, and this one is using Compose styling. And then at the end, we have the image with this refresh icon. And as you can see here, we are calling clickable, and this is something that I will talk about later in the talk. There is also one thing to notice. Oh, sorry, this was on the previous slide. As you can see, the text color is changed for the day and night, and this is something that Glance provides us to have to update the widget based on dark and light mode. And we have only those two that we can use, so it's day for the light mode and the night for the dark mode. So we know basically how to build the UI, but now the important thing, how to manage the state. So the Glance widget is coming with some handy tools, and one of this is Glance state definition. And this is the Glance state definition underneath is just a preferences. So those definitions are working like that you have the preferences with some key, and the key for those preferences is your Glance ID. So every widget that you are placing on the home screen have its own unique app ID, and with those app ID, there is connection to the preferences that you can use for the state management. And the Glance ID is just an interface that use app widget ID and app widget ID as a parameter. It's an internal data class, so you cannot go in and check what is the real system app widget ID. But if you work with the widget, you know that those app widget IDs were changing constantly. If you were rerunning the system, the app widget ID was changed. This one, the glance ID, is not doing that. So it's a huge improvement, in my opinion, because this glance ID stays forever in the same number. So you have the unique number that stays with your widget. So to access those preferences, as I told you, we have just this glance definition, and you are calling to save or get your preferences, you are just calling the keys. So in my case, I have the widget latitude key and widget longitude key. Since we are building the weather widget, it's the most important part. I create a simple helper, just an object to save my preferences and get those preferences. Nothing really important here. Just you will not be confused later in the slides. So now, when we know how to save the state and retrieve it, we can get rid of this state in the constructor, and we can call state. It's equal to widget state helper.getState, and we are calling current state. And current state is a function that we can call in the widget class. So every class that extends glance app widget, and you have immediate access to the preferences for this glance ID. So for your unique widget. Now we'll learn how to trigger the widget updates. So in order to update the widget, we need to do two things. We need to update its state, calling update app widget state, which is a suspendable function. We need to provide the context, glance ID, and updated state. And then when we have the updated state, we need to trigger the composition. So the compositions are not triggered automatically. We need to do it manually. And to trigger the composition, we are just calling update in the class of Jetpack Glance. And this one requires context and obviously glance ID, as this is needed every time, everywhere. So this is this unique ID that represents our widget. Okay, so now we know something about the state management and how to trigger the updates, but where we should do the actual computation for the widgets. So in my opinion, we should do it in Work Manager. There are no currently guidelines from Google how to really do that. Maybe this is because it's still in alpha, but I talked with Google Developer Relations, and the guy that is doing Glance told me that Work Manager is a good fit. So in Work Manager, we can do our networking. We can access some local database. We can do some calculations. And then we can trigger update to our widget or view. But how to trigger this update? So in previous slides, I showed you this refresh icon with the modifier clickable. And on click action, we can call something like action run callback. And this is specific for the Glance widget, Glance class. And this is how it looks. So there is a class, action callback, that you can extend. And there is one function to override that gives you already the context, glance ID, and action parameters. So everything you need to actually update this widget. And in my case, in this action callback, I'm calling my preferences using the glance ID to retrieve the location, because this is what I need to update my weather widget, my latitude and longitude. And then I'm calling one-time worker to trigger my update. So this is for manual update. I'm just triggering this. But how can I change the state from this worker? This is a totally different story, because we know how to update the widget from widget, like from inside of the widget, but how to update it from another class. So there are those two functions, one that is updating state and one is updating the UI. In my case, I want the widget to be updated every time the state changes. So I just combine it into one function, which is update widget state. It is just combining those two things. And then in the worker, I have access to my repository, app context, and worker parameters. And on do work, I'm taking location from the workers parameters. And then there is something fresh new, which is Glance App Widget Manager. And this manager stores every Glance IDs that you are using currently in the system. And it's working pretty well because we can call get Glance IDs from this manager and using our class reference to get the IDs only for this specific type of widget. So when we get those, then we need to search for the ones that have our ID. So I'm calling here weather widget.getAppWidgetState. So I have the state of preferences, and I'm checking if this ID is the same as from the Glance App Widget Manager. With all of this, I have access to my preferences. I have access to my state. I can check if it's stored. I have my latitude and longitude. So then I can go to do my work, update widget state, and set loading to true. Then call my repository to get the data using my latitude and longitude. And then on success, I'm updating the widget state with my Glance ID and giving the new state using my helper to save the new state. On failure, I want to loading to stop and display the previous data. I do not want to display the error state, just the previous weather info. So now we know how to manage the state, trigger the update, but how about initial configuration? So whenever you're putting the widget on the screen and you have something to choose from, we are running the initial configuration. And here in my case, it's just simple list of those place items where I have some cities. In this case, I'm displaying Oslo. And in this configure activity, when user clicks on the button, I again need to know what is the Glance ID of the widget that I just placed on the home screen. So as you can see, the most important thing in the whole Glance is knowing your Glance ID. And to know it here, I'm calling again Glance App Widget Manager with get Glance IDs with my class, and I'm just taking the last one. The reason is that when user is placing the widget on the home screen, the app ID and Glance ID is already created. So it is the last one in that list. It doesn't have the state yet, so I cannot search it for my latitude and longitude or something like that. But it is the last one in the list. So with having my Glance ID, I can call the weather widget. I can update the state using the latitude and longitude. I can save my location and address because those are the things that I know from the city list. Then I can call update. And after that, I'm starting my weather worker, which will be a periodic worker that will automatically, every 15 minutes, update the widget. Then I'm finishing my activity. And now I will show you how to enqueue the widget update work to automatically trigger and update the state of the widget. So the worker itself is the same as the previous one that I was enqueuing for manual updates. So for one-time updates, this one will be just periodic. So firstly, I'm check if I'm connected to the network. Then I'm creating the periodic work request for my weather widget worker. 15 minutes is the minimum time that I can apply for the periodic updates. So my widget will be automatically update every 15 minutes. In case something go wrong, it will exponentially prolong the time between updates. Then I'm setting the inputs because I need to know my latitude and longitude to use it as worker parameters. So I'm putting the inputs for my worker, setting the constraint, and build it. After that, I'm putting the unique tag to do not have multiple workers in case of someone will break things, I don't know, put few widgets that have the same location. So I'm putting the unique tag with my latitude and longitude. So even if you will put 3 widgets for the same city, there will be still just one unique worker to handle 3 of them. And at the end, I'm enqueuing this periodic worker. So the next topic is opening from widget. So when we click on the widget, we would like to have our application open and pass some parameters from that widget. In this case, since this is very simple application, just to show you how the glance work, we'll just display what place you clicked and what is the latitude and longitude. There are some clickable actions that we can apply to the clickable glance modifier, and this is action start activity, which we'll use in this case, action run callback that I used for refreshing. Then we have start service and start broadcast receiver. So to use that, we have here the glance modifier, and on the root, as you can see with the app widget background, I'm just calling clickable, and on the click action, I will call action start activity. I need to put the name of the activity, so there is a main activity.class, and then parameters, which are the actions parameter. This is the function that Glance have in the library, and I'm putting the actions parameter keys for my latitude, longitude, and the widget name, which is my address. So I think I covered most of the things, but still Glance do need XMLs. And why is that? First of all, we need to put in our XML file the weather widget provider, which is XML. So the way we are doing it currently for non-Glance widget is exactly the same as for the Glance widget. So we just need to make the initial configuration. We need to put information about initial layout, what is the min width, min height, resize mode available, and update periodic milliseconds. Actually, we do not need to put that since we are updating the widget automatically every 15 minutes. But this one will trigger the update of the state, so the UI update. Even if something will go wrong, it will just invalidate the widget. Then another thing which is XML is this layout. We cannot specify the initial layout as Compose or Glance. We just still need to produce XML layout. So I just put a simple thing, which is just a progress bar with a text as my initial layout. And at the end, Glance do not, sorry, I missed the word. We still need to use XML for drawables. We cannot use the Compose library with icons. So every icon that you need to put probably needs also to be prepared for the dark and light mode. As you can see here in Android Tint, I'm putting the color on primary, and this color on primary also is not in Kotlin file, it's still in XML. So for those things, we need still XMLs. And some of my thoughts and conclusions. In my opinion, we really needed that because current widget is not working good. Its documentation is not the best, but the Glance widget is going into a good direction. It follows some composable syntax. So if you are happy with Compose, you will be happy with Glance widget. We do not have a lot of components because we are limited with remote views, but we can use some kind of Compose functions. It supports Android 12 features like corner radius or themes, things like that. It's still in Alpha 5, although I will tell you about this in next slide. And there are some examples and recommendations from Googlers, but there are no full guideline and documentation, probably because it's still alpha, but I'm really hoping to see that soon. So the reason I was telling you throughout the slides that, in my opinion, it's okay to use it on production, because currently I'm using it on production for more than a year now. And the reason I did that is because Glance is just a wrapper, and underneath you have the RemoteViews and app widget ID and provider. Like it's a wrapper. So I was working for widgets for more than a year with the legacy widgets, and it was painful. It was really, a lot of things were not working. I didn't understood how the library really works with the on-receive, on-update things, how to receive the events. And now with Glance, I do not have any problem at all. I'm running that, I think it's more than a year now, and it's working since Alpha 1. So there are some changes, and I talked with one Google developer relation, why it's still in alpha, not beta, for example. And he told me that there are some things that they need to cover in terms of naming and having more examples to work on. That's why it's still in alpha. But in my opinion, it's stable. So I encourage you to use it, or at least try. That's everything. There is a link to GitHub with all the code with this weather widget. So fully working application is there in case you would like to use it. Any questions?